to teach. And so as we've seen this opposition, because people are listening, they're obeying the gospel. And so now Stephen is in the same situation of having this opposition directed toward him. The council, or maybe these elders and scribes, think, well, we couldn't silence the apostles. Let's see about those others. Do something against them to get them to be quiet. But they begin with, they have suborned, they have bribed these people. Now what kind of witnesses do they have? They're false witnesses. So in a simple word, what does that make them? They're liars. They're liars. You mean you can pay people money to lie? They're ready to make some money. Now, what makes it a little more interesting is the council is on whose side? Not Stephen's, right? So if you've got a council sitting there and you have paid these false witnesses, that council is probably going to be more favorable to those false witnesses. They're on the same side. And so the outcome pretty much is already determined, as it was with Jesus. Did they have truthful witnesses there? No. Same thing is happening. But now with the followers of Christ and not Jesus himself. Stephen has spoken evil, according to them, against Moses, against God, against the temple, and against the law. That's the accusation made by false witnesses, the accusation made by suborned men, paid off people. But it's not going to work. More specifically now, verse 14, we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth shall destroy this place and shall change the customs which Moses delivered unto us. Is that true or is it a lie? Robert? Mm-hmm. Correct. Right. In reality, this is probably a true statement that things are going to change, because that Old Testament law is going to be changed to the law of Christ. And so for these Jews, all the way back to Acts chapter 2, they had to make a change. A difference had to come. And so when they make this statement, keep in mind still the setting, it's the Sanhedrin, the council that's there. They didn't like Jesus. They didn't like the apostles. And they don't like what Stephen is doing here. But it's specifically the lesson about Jesus of Nazareth. Matthew 24, we find that Jesus himself teaches about the destruction of Jerusalem, specifically as the temple within that city is also destroyed. That happened. If someone were to tell you that a tornado, from the storms as we think about it, it's going to destroy your house, Would you be happy about it? Would it be disturbing? The Jews have worshiped in the temple all the way back to the days of Solomon, almost 1,000 years before Christ. That's the place that they're aware of. That's where we go to worship. And now someone comes along and says it's going to be destroyed. It would be. The second accusation that they made, he's going to change the customs. Now, keep in mind, he's already talked about Moses and he's talked about the law. These customs are referring back to the Old Testament. It may be expanded, though, to also include all of these various teachings that have been added by the rabbis and all these notes we might say in the margin of their Bible that they now say, hey, this is what we've got to do. Do we like change? Some of it's very uncomfortable. Some of it's very hard, especially if that's what we've been used to all of our life. As people say, mom and dad did it that way. Grandparents did it that way. Go back generations. Our family's always done it that way. And now someone comes along and says, it's got to change. Well, there's no doubt with the destruction of the temple, what sits, or is there a temple in Jerusalem now? There's not a temple. There are synagogues within the city, but you know what sits on the site of where the temple was? An Islamic mosque, the Dome of the Rock. The Jews have nowhere to go to offer, according to the Old Testament law, any of their animal sacrifices or the other ones as well. And so that made a big change, made a difference. But he says, Moses delivered this unto us. So now with that evidence, all that sat in the council, looking steadfastly on him, saw his face as it had been the face of an angel. It wasn't necessary in trials of the first century as it is today for us. A person does not have to speak up and defend himself. He's not going to do it right now, but chapter 7, he goes into big detail about it, of what the Old Testament law was, how it served God's purpose. But the council see Stephen sitting there, and they see something about his face. Now, exactly what it means to have the face of an angel, I have no idea. Maybe his face was, innocent. Maybe his face showed that he was steadfast. Any ideas about what you might think the face of an angel is? I don't know that it's the closest thing, but what happened when Moses went up and received the 10 Commandments and the reaction of the people? All right. Because of that glory that was there, they could not look upon his face. What is meant here, we can suggest and we can guess, but we don't really know. But no doubt, as you have, how many people were in the Sanhedrin? 70 of them. Here you have 70 individuals steadfastly looking at Stephen. That's probably a little bit intimidating. Not only do you have the false witnesses, but now you have these other men who are also looking down on you, wanting to silence you. And yet here is the way that he looked at the situation. Any comments about chapter 6 before we move on? All right, let's go to the next chapter, chapter 7. Here again we have the overriding point that this is Stephen's sermon, the opportunity for him to be able to make a case for himself. Again, they did not have to. Much like Jesus, when he was asked questions, he remained silent many times. But here's how it begins. Verse 1, then said the high priest, are these things so? Pilate and Herod would continue to question Jesus quite similarly. Are you the king? Are you the Messiah? And so they just point blank ask. They've already heard the false witnesses. So they give him an open door. He didn't give them just a yes or no answer, which most of the time people on trial are said, you know, just don't give any more information than you have to, just yes or no as far as the answer. But he begins his sermon, verse 2. And he said, men, brethren, fathers. He's being complimentary to them. He calls them his brothers. According to the flesh, that's what they were. Fathers, from the standpoint that they were these rulers. Hearken. Acts 2 verse 14, Peter does the same thing. Hearken unto my words. Listen to them. Pay attention to it. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia before he dwelt in Charan. Why would it be important to speak of Abraham as their father? Is that what they believed, or is it something else? No. That's exactly what he was. With Abraham, there began the transition from the patriarchal, which dealt with all of the people, to now the selection of Abraham as the father. So, question is, where is Mesopotamia? Where is Charan? Where was Abraham's home? Was he not from the Ur of the Chaldees? Mesopotamia is that area with the Tigris and the Euphrates River. The change from the Old Testament to the New, Greek language has no H letter by itself. So something else has to be supplied. So here we have the northern portion where Abraham came to of Haran. So God spoke to him when he was still in Mesopotamia, the Ur of the Chaldees. Abraham has traveled all the way up what is called the Fertile Crescent. And now he's stopped at this place, Charan or Haran as the Old Testament. And so he is making an appeal to their reasoning. He doesn't start off somewhere else, giving a sermon about something different. The saying many times is, you start where they are. These people had a belief in Abraham as their father. They trusted in him and the promises that were made to him. So here's the message of God to Abram. Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. All the way back to Genesis 12. The initial promise that is made to Abraham of what's going to happen to him, but also to the entire world because of what happens through the generations that lead all the way to Jesus Christ. How much faith would it take Abraham to do this? Leave your land, leave your kindred, family, everything that you know about. Has he ever been to the land of Palestine? Is it someplace that he's already seen and knows what it is? No. I don't know how this preacher did this, but in earlier years, as automobiles weren't available, people traveled a lot by trains. This preacher said that when he was asked to come hold a meeting, that he would not buy a train ticket himself. He felt that if God wanted him to go to that place, then somehow or another it would be provided. I don't know how reasonable that is, or how often he was left waiting for the train. But here's Abraham. You've got to leave everything behind. Whatever you possess, whatever family you might have, they stay and you go. Now we know from the reading of Hebrews chapter 11, that hall of the faithful, that Abraham is counted as one to have obeyed God. But what a faith it must have been to trust that God would do it, would bless him as he said he would. How far, how many miles did it take to go from Mesopotamia to Haran? Almost 1,000 miles. That's a long trip when you're either walking or riding camels or some type of animal. A long ways to go. Take quite a number of days. So he's to leave. But notice the end of verse 3, the land which I will show you. Sight unseen. Pack up and go. So it says, then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran. And from thence went, when his father was dead, he removed him into the land wherein ye now dwell. So now here's the connection. Where you live, it's because of Abraham. If he had remained where he was, if he did not have that faith, then you wouldn't have this land that you now occupy. And so you are blessed. You have been helped by the one that you refer back to as your father. And so that's the big connection between them. Verse 5, he gave him none inheritance in it. No, not so much as to set his foot on. Yet he promised that he would give it to him for a possession and to his seed after him, when as yet he had no child. So just as strong as the command to leave the Ur of the Chaldees is now moved to this promised land. He hasn't seen it, hasn't set foot there, doesn't have kids yet, and yet God tells him it's going to be for your descendants. It's going to be for those people that come after you. Everything that we work for, everything that we strive to attain, one day is going to go to someone else. We're going to pass it along to them. And yet Abraham here has said he didn't enjoy it as his. If he had, he would not have had to buy a place to bury his wife. But it's going to be given to these others. All right, we've gotten just a little bit of an introduction to it. We'll continue again Wednesday night as far as moving. So read on through chapter 7.